Hey everyone, Languagehacker here. Let me talk about the 4 decks that I brought to Grandmasters Week 1. For those who didn't watch, I ended up bringing Watchpost Rogue, Libram Secret Paladin, Lunacy Mage, and Control Warlock. So let me go through and explain some of the tech choices in each of these decks I brought and why I brought them, the decks and the lineup that I did. So right off the bat, you'll notice that if you looked at the stats on Twitter or whatever of all the decks that people brought, almost everyone in GM brought Mage, Paladin, Rogue, and then a 4th deck. And the reason for that is because these 3 decks are so much, these 3 classes and decks are so much more powerful than the other classes right now in the meta, that it didn't actually make sense to try and bring decks that countered them. It made more sense to bring them and then hope that your 4th deck is just better than your opponent's, or that your 4th deck can sneak in a win against some of the good decks. I tried pretty extensively to try to make some other stuff work. As you can see here, I have several other decks built that I tested for a long time. OTK Demon Hunter I tried some Jomber Death Rattle, I tried some Soul DH, Token Druid, I tried a bunch of other stuff. And there was no good cohesive strategy that either beat Mage consistently, beat Rogue consistently, or beat Paladin consistently. Arguably, you could try to target Paladin a little bit, I think, but you would have to bring decks that perform so poorly against the other meta decks that it's just not worth doing. So that's why I settled on the first 3 classes. I ended up on Warlock because I felt that Warlock had a decent enough matchup against Mage, a decent enough matchup against Paladin, and a decent enough matchup against Rogue. It could win against all 3 of these. There's also some tech cards that you can include in Warlock that you might not be able to include in other decks because of available flex spots in there that I wanted to account for other people bringing some off-meta stuff. For example, Fled, who happened to bring a full aggro lineup, or even some other people who ended up bringing not Miracle or Watchpost Rogue, but there are actually quite a few people who brought Weapon Rogue as well, and I thought that Warlock could have some of those flex spots available in the deck list to try to combat that. I mean, since we're talking about Warlock, let's go over here first. A lot of this stuff is pretty standard. 4 1s. Some people ended up cutting 2 of the 1s for some other greedier stuff, but I think against Rogue in particular, Paladin, and any aggressive decks, you definitely need the 4 1s to help contest board. I included 2 copies of Ooze for the aforementioned aggro rogues, but also against the Paladin matchup. If you can get rid of their weapon on curve, the rest of the game plays out pretty easily. They don't have enough pressure to just shut you out of the game, so you just go back and forth a little bit until you jam Jiraxis or Ticketus, and then the game slowly gets grinded out from there if you don't die to Penflingers. So if you can combat their early development pretty nicely, I found that most games you just end up winning. Most of the games that went past turn 8, 9, 10, I found I was winning with this deck against Paladin. That being said, sometimes you still just die, and that happens, but that's why I included Oozes. Drain Soul Sorcerer, pretty standard. Hysteria, Hoarders, Spirits, almost everything else here is standard. I don't think Kazakus is good. I think you want the heavy removal option for Paladin specifically. Ogremancers helped quite a bit if I'm leaving up Mage and Rogue. The ban for this lineup is a little bit flexible. I'd still prefer to ban Mage, but if their 4th deck happens to be very aggressive and good against some of my other decks, it makes more sense to ban that and then just leave Mage up. So in that case, Ogremancers is good to have included, and it helps also against Aggro Rogue, which I was expecting a bit of. It's also pretty decent against Paladin. It's one of the only like mid-range minions you can drop that actually helps you out if you manage to keep removing their board. Vol'jin, very useful in Paladin, not so useful in other stuff. You can pull out Penflingers in some matchups, mainly against Rogue. You can technically sap a Mage minion if they don't have any other minions in hand from Font of Power. But mainly the application was to give me a good edge against Paladin. And the rest of here is pretty standard as well. I included only 1 copy of Strongman because I needed to make some space for other cards that I wanted, i.e. Vol'jin and 2 Oozes. And Strongman was one of the weakest cards in practice against the decks that I was trying to beat. So that's the Warlock. It actually ended up performing quite well. The only losses the Warlock had were to games that just were non-games. I drew double Jiraxis, I drew double Nether, Yasharj, Jiraxis against Aggro Rogue, and I kind of just died. But every game where I didn't draw my expensive stuff and die, and died, it ended up going really well with this deck. So I'm happy with the bring. It's unfortunate it didn't work out, but I think this was the deck to bring this week. Lunacy Mage, pretty standard. I see a lot of people running ring tosses. I think it's a bit of a greedy inclusion. For Ring Toss to work, you have to play one of the more expensive cards. I even cut down on one of the 7 drops because I expected if Mage were to be left up, it'd be a more aggressive lineup that would do it. So because of that and the expectation of Aggro Rogue, I included 2 barriers, which also helps against Paladin sometimes. If you need a bit of time to catch up on the draws after Floor Lunacy, this can buy you a little bit of time. Otherwise, it's pretty standard. I still like having double combustion, double brain freeze. Some people started cutting this in line for more greedy things, and I think that's just wrong. It might depend on what kind of meta you expect in your region. If your region happens to bring a lot more control-y stuff, then maybe you do want more top end. But I expected some aggressive choices from my peers, which is why I tended towards more anti-aggressive strategies. Yeah, nothing too crazy here. Paladin, also nothing super crazy. This is pretty standard 30. I wanted to include 6 secrets, but it's really hard to find space for that. I feel that if you end up cutting Libram of Justice, some people did that to help against Mage, where you add another, you add a Libram of Judgment, which gives you a bit of finishing power. You get some burst. I felt like that's really weak, because as soon as you fall behind in any matchup, not just against Mage, you just lose now because you only have 1 Justice, so I didn't really want to cut that, and everything else is pretty non-cuttable. So because of that, I just settled on 5 secrets, which was the standard. I think it's illegal not to run 2 Omayogs over the 2 Saviors. And I run Cariel over Kazakis. I tested both. Both felt fine, but in the end, I just flipped a coin because I just... This felt a little cleaner in some matches. The Kazakis has a bigger power spike. This is just a bit more consistent. So it kind of depends. I think this is more... There's not enough stats out to give you a good idea of which one's strictly better. So it's more of a preference thing. And finally, Watch Post Rogue. This is a standard 30 card list. I didn't tinker around with this too much. I didn't think it needed that much tinkering. If I expected to leave Mage up in every scenario, I could have cut the Og Merchants and put in Cult Neophytes, which would have also hit some other decks as well. It would have helped against Aggro Rogue too. But I wasn't super concerned about getting Rogue through, so I didn't really want to tech this too heavily. This usually just finds a win in most lineups. Yeah. I ended top 8 this week. Coming out of the group stages, I was 1-1, won my decider match. So I made it into top 8, and then I lost on Saturday to Dreadeye. Unfortunate, would have liked to go further, but this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. There's gonna be 6 weeks, or 7 weeks. I should really know. Anyways, there's several tournaments we have to go through before we decide who goes to playoffs. So I'm pretty happy with my top 8 finish week 1. Yeah, make sure to drop a follow, smash that subscribe button. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and go check out my other videos. I'll be doing this every week, so look forward to more of these deck analysis. See ya.